The year is 1985. Somewhere between spy and scientist, a man of mystery blasts into our living rooms. No backstory yet, just a paperclip, some duct tape, and a Swiss Army knife. Oh, and a talent for turning everyday junk into solutions. This is where it all begins. Let's rewind to MacGyver, Season 1. We begin the pilot episode with an opening gambit in a totally nondescript location somewhere in the Grand Canyon. Asia. We get that classic MacGyver voiceover that will become a staple of these cold opens, while Mac, who by the way has a fear of heights, is just casually scaling that Chirac face towards a crashed Air Force jet. After dispatching 2 guards, he disguises himself as one, and even carries a gun to maintain that disguise, even though it's later discovered he hates guns. He's severely outnumbered, and thanks to some bad intel, he wasn't even told there was a survivor. He's only supposed to sneak in, deactivate a missile, and sneak out. Easy day at the office, right? Well, he slips into that tent where they're hiding the missile, and of course, we get that classic cliche, the countdown timer. Paperclip? Check. And naturally, that little piece of office supply ends up saving the day, as he uses it to fool the sensor and stop the countdown. It all comes down to that 1 second left on the clock. Again, another trope of the 80s. To create a distraction, Mac rigs up an AK as a makeshift time delay noisemaker. It goes off, chaos erupts, and our heroes sprint to the cliff edge. Wait a minute. He's actually using one of those guns. Luckily, he has one more trick in his backpack. He was actually carrying a parachute this whole time. Isn't that convenient? He turns the flare gun into sort of a rocket assist, blasts them clear of the cliff edge, and they parachute to safety. Just another day at the office. Back in L.A., MacGyver's living at the Griffith Observatory. Not a bad place to call home if that's your thing. While Dr. Marlowe arrives at his secret lab, he'll be taken to meet Dr. Steubens so they can finish the chess game they started remotely. Marlowe, played by Olaf Pooley, screen career lasts over 55 years. He's one of only about 25 actors to appear in both Star Trek and the original Doctor Who, while Dr. Steubens is played by Paul Stewart, whose career spanned almost 5 decades, including a role in the legendary 1938 radio broadcast of War of the Worlds. Just as the clock strikes 11, Steubens suddenly apologizes, and a bomb goes off in the next lab, which severely damages the facility, trapping an unknown number of scientists below ground, and cracking a sulfuric acid tank in the facility, which leads us to our main crisis. Gant arrives in a helicopter to pick up Mac. That helicopter, by the way, was also used in Blue Thunder as one of the LAPD fleet. Gant is played by Michael Lerner, a prolific character actor with over 180 credits. Speaking of Blue Thunder, the helicopter that arrives at the facility is an Aeropostale SA-341 Foxtrot, the same one used as Blue Thunder in the movie. Note the weapons. Mac receives a briefing and then meets Andy Coulson, who's played by Dana Elcar, who would later go on to play Pete Thornton in most of the series. Here's a fun fact. Some of these sets are set redresses from Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, and once you know that, you can't unsee it. Mac gains access to the elevator shaft, exposes, and then attempts to deactivate the laser security grid using a mirror from his binoculars. He directs the laser back to itself, causing a mild explosion, and the security grid is deactivated. He descends down the elevator shaft into the upper labs and discovers a blockage. He hears survivors from the other side. Hearing Gant drinking coffee gives Mac an idea. He uses a fire hose to create leverage, pushes the beam away, and lands on the other side. He radios, and the survivors are taken to the top for safety. Approaching the labs and the stairway, he realizes another blockage and a potential fire on the other side. Now what to do? The only way down is going to be through what was known as the gas chamber. He does pick up some chocolates on the way. You'll see why later. She just had to say it. The airlocks are supposed to close. Well, she got her wish. The airlocks close, trapping them just above the gas lab. Not knowing what the gas is, Topside tries to get the ventilation circuits working, but they short out. So the only way down now is going to be through the gas. Before going down, the ladies' man Mac gets a kiss, busts through the glass, and then descends down into the lab. He has to reset the ventilation circuits manually. He gets them working, the gas starts to be evacuated, and he goes through the torpedo hatch. Access hatch. That was a restress of the torpedo room from Star Trek II. He meets up with Barbara and realizes he lost his radio. With Barbara on his shoulders, they use the chocolate in the acid to stop the leak. This has been proven to work, at least briefly. However, with the fumes coming off the acid, they should both be gasping and experiencing respiratory issues. They make their way to the lab and realize access is blocked. MacGyver detects the smell of explosives, so he decides to make one of his own. He calls for sodium metal, hides a small amount of it in a cold capsule, and drops it in some water to create a small explosion to clear debris. The resulting blast was way bigger than it should have been. This was disproven, even using 100 times the amount of sodium. Now, with the way into the lab, they're met with one more surprise. It's Dubins. Wouldn't you know it, he's behind it all along. His intention was neither he nor Marlowe would survive. As the only experts in the field, they did not want their research being turned into a weapon. He again tries to unalive Marlowe. Barbara intervenes and gets shot for her trouble. Realizing time is running out, Mac quickly sends a signal topside to stop the intervention techniques they were going to use. With the crisis averted and everyone back topside, Mac, of course, says goodbye with a kiss. Now back home, he's back with his little brother. It's a pretty sweet-looking apartment except for that freaking door. In this pilot episode, it's still not fully clear what Mac actually does, only that he works with, or maybe for Gant. But as a setup for the series, it's a strong start. Invented MacGyverisms, a tense disaster scenario, a nice mix of character, science, and of course, 80 TV's spectacle. Overall, I give this MacGyver episode a solid 8 rolls of tape out of 10. And now from the high-tech labs of a secret underground facility, we're heading into the jungle of Burma in the Golden Triangle. Let's rewind. However, before we get to the jungle, we start in a junkyard, where he is quietly observing a shady little meeting. Someone is selling nuclear launch codes out of the back of a car. Very 80s problem. In classic Mac fashion, he uses that giant junkyard magnet to stack both the briefcase and the gun in one smooth move. Unfortunately, after a brief game of hide and seek, the bad guys find him and he ends up locked inside a car that's about to be fed to the crusher. With the walls literally closing in, he scrambles into the trunk, forces it open from the inside, slipping out just in time. He turns the tables on him by pinning their car against the support, then he just casually calls in his own bag up. Just another day at the office for MacGyver. Of course, there has to be that punny one-liner. Now, just relaxing on the beach, he can't even find peace. As a 3-star Air Force general walks up and hands him a mission to Burma, recover a poison canister in 24 hours. Once Mac arrives, things get dark fast. Mac sees villagers being used as slave labor to harvest opium. A young boy manages to escape the overseers and eventually leads Mac to the wreckage of the crashed cargo plane. The bad news: the canister is already gone. Mac is captured and mistaken for an American narcotics agent. General Narai arrives in his MD-500 helicopter, which is the same model used in Magnum P.I. Narai, by the way, is played by George Cheung, who racked up over 200 acting credits, including 2 more MacGyver episodes, a couple of A-Team appearances, 3 episodes of MASH, and just about every other action show from this era. While the village leader, Anek, is played by Clyde Kusatsu, with an incredible 300 roles to his name. You've probably seen him in something. One of his early films is Midway, and like Cheung, he also turned up multiple times on MASH. MacGyver, believed to be a narcotics agent, is now tied up outside the village. The boy and his sister cross paths with him. She refuses to help him escape, but the boy later sneaks back in with the knife. Mac uses it to free himself and quietly takes out both guards. He quickly returns to the village, frees the pigs to create a distraction because nothing says chaos like angry livestock running through a camp, and from there he makes his way to the covered cargo. He gathers flares, a life vest, and a raft. Mac rigs the gear into a time-delayed fuse setup, using the raft and vest to trigger the flares and blow out the tire just at the right moment. After a quick battle, of course, Mac arrives victorious. He retrieves the canister and heads off to the LZ. However, he just deposits the canister in a helicopter and decides to remain behind and help the village one more time. MacGyver returns and helps the village build traps and patiently awaits the convoy's return. Now, the trap set, Trang's vehicle is very rapidly disabled as he drives into a pit, while the rest of his convoy becomes disabled with the rigged AKs shooting out the tires. Of course, they eventually make it to the village anyways, but the normally quiet and subjugated Ming takes out Trang. This impresses the rest of the villagers, and even Mac seems slightly impressed. However, this is short-lived, as General Narai is back, but this time, he's mounted weapons to his helicopter. Pinned down, Mac looks for a solution, and he finds one, a length of cable. He attaches it to the winch. He secures it to the helicopter, and manually winches the helicopter down to the ground. Now it's time for the final showdown with General Narai. What starts out as a fist fight doesn't end that way, as Narai quickly grabs his saber, but trips on the skid, eventually falling on his own saber. Thus ends the battle. We're only 2 episodes into MacGyver, and his body count's already higher than the entire A-Team in the first season. This is a much darker episode than the pilot. It's still a solid watch, but it leans hard into that very 80s trope. The lone American hoping a small village free themselves from a brutal power. Not one of my personal favorites from Season 1, but it has its moments. Overall, I give the Golden Triangle 6.5 rolls of tape out of 10. And now, from the jungles of Burma, we head to the streets of Budapest in Thief of Budapest. So, let's rewind. But before he gets there, he's got to recover a stolen horse. It was actually stolen by a rival tribal leader. Things escalate into a small skirmish, and the only way out is up. Mac and the horse get airlifted to safety. It's peak 80s TV energy and has nothing to do with the rest of the episode, but it's a fun little intro. Now in Budapest, Mac's official there to meet a contact named Nikolai, but as a former racer, he's also got his eye on a local road rally. Before he can even settle in, he's pickpocketed by a young girl. Actually, twice. And instead of getting mad, he's almost amused by how good she is. Now, there's definitely some noticeable ADR on Yana's lines, especially in the outdoor scenes, and it really stands out once you notice it. Mac finally sees Nikolai, who's carrying a watch that contains important information. Nikolai tells Mac to meet him in a cafe. They go their separate ways. However, beforehand, he slips on some marbles, and Yana lifts the watch from him. He sees some guys tailing him, runs into traffic, and has an untimely meeting with a truck. You might recognize him from a few things, such as some episodes of JAG, as well as the main antagonist in 1990's Navy SEALs. This brings up Inspector Mesic of the Hungarian police, who's working with a Russian agent to track down both Yana and Mac. Mesic is played by Michael Constantine, a classic heavy with over 180 credits, and shows up in another episode of MacGyver. Mac manages to track Yana down and finds her hiding in a trash can. He gets his trusty pocket knife back, but the bad news is, she's already passed the watch on to her brother Bruno, but the whole family has been taken into custody. Now at the compound, and that compound looks slightly familiar, and it should. It's a redress of the same set used in the A-Team's Children of Jamestown episode. Mac spots some debris that he uses to his advantage. He makes a noise distraction device to force the van to stop, gets in the back of the delivery van, dons a disguise, and gathers some equipment. After mixing up some ingredients to create a distraction, he reconnects with the family and tells them he's got a plan. He has them start a fake fight while he rigs equipment to drag razor wire across the compound, making it nearly impossible to stop. He then crashes through the perimeter, scoops up Yana, and they escape. The victory is short-lived when he learns that Bruno has already sold the watch. Mac heads to the equivalent of a local dive bar where the watch has been fenced. He meets Orina, the fence, and goes into full-on Mr. Ladies Man mode. Instead of running a con, he tells her the truth about the watch and shows her the names it contains. Someone obviously ratted him out, because guess who's here? Rena hands her the watch anyways, and Mac makes a run for it. He jumps into a cab driven by a familiar face. Yana's dream is to get her and her family to the U.S., and Mac is reluctantly now determined to try to make that happen. They grab some coveralls as disguises. Mac sabotages the traffic signals using pieces of a credit card, classic street-level MacGyvering, and they steal 3 minis, just as Inspector Mesic drives up, and a full-on car chase kicks off. Most of the car action here was actually lifted from the 1969 film The Italian Job, which you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. They have to slow the pursuers down any way they can. Mac gets the idea to tape a transistor radio to the police radio, attach it to some balloons, and send it up, effectively jamming all police communications. They continue racing through the streets and buildings of Budapest, losing pursuers along the way. They escape into a tunnel system where they have some friends waiting for them at the exit to close the gate on anyone that remains. Hey, look! I found him! It's Waldo. They finally cross the border into Austria and leave their pursuers behind. Mac promises Jan and her family they'll be able to come to the U.S. He gives her his knife as a parting gift. She gives him her medal, and the family says goodbye. And we have another episode in the books. Not another real strong one, but it still has its moments. There seems to be a lot of ADR work on this one, and a lot of recycled footage from the movie The Italian Job. But overall, I give this one 7 rolls of tape. Well, Mac had to save trapped scientists and the water supply, free a village from a ruthless leader, and secure a list from a fallen friend while rescuing a family along the way. I'd say that's a pretty solid start to another 80s powerhouse show. So why don't you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next MacGyver Rewind, where he rescues an American journalist, recovers stolen diamonds from an island casino owner in a very pseudo-James Bond adventure, and tries to save an Amazonian plantation from killer ants. Thank you for watching, and remember, be kind and rewind.